Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and a very special welcome if you're new. My name is Shelly and I am the owner and creator of the Vintage Hen and Chick. And in today's video, we're going to be doing some vintage breadboard upcycles. So if you enjoy trash to treasure upcycles, thrift flips, furniture flips, or just crafting in general, then you are in the right place. Make sure and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll get notified whenever I upload a new video. Now let's get started. So I went into my stash and I pulled out 3 breadboards. This is a wood round that I got from Menards, and these 2 breadboards are something that I picked up, I believe, at a thrift store. And we are going to put a wash over it, and so we're going to be using Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color of suitcase. And then I'm going to mix it very light. So we're going to do about 10 parts water to 1 part milk paint. I just want to make a wash for the boards, or like a food safe stain. So I'm going to mix that real well until the milk paint is dissolved in the water. And then I'm going to take my microfiber cloth and we're going to apply it to all of our pine boards with the cloth, just like you would a stain. Now, if you were going to make a decor board and you didn't want to use it for food, you could use a regular oil-based or water-based stain, but knowing that you couldn't use it for food because those aren't food safe. But Sweet Pickins milk paint is 100% food safe, and so you can use this breadboard for actual food. So I'm going to continue to add my stain to my boards, and then we'll set those aside and I'm going to let them dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. The reason I chose the color suitcase in the Sweet Pickins milk paint is because I want my breadboards to look vintage and grungy and old. And that's why I chose a darker color. I wanted to cover up this light color of the pine wood. And so you can use any color you want from Sweet Pickins, but my purpose behind it and my inspiration behind these breadboards was old, dingy, vintage, and used. And that's why I chose the darker color of the suitcase. So we're going to decorate one side of these breadboards. One side's going to be one that you can use to cut your food on. The other side is going to be for decoration. And with that, I'm going to add a coat of paint to the decorated side, and I'm using Dixie Belle's drop cloth. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a messy coat on the side of this breadboard. Nothing neat, nothing fancy. I'm not even going to do full coverage. I'm just going to do a really messy coat over the front side of this breadboard. And I'm going to do this, then we'll set this aside and let it dry, and then I'll move on to the next breadboards. The next breadboard I'm going to do a messy coat of the color English Ivy, which is a really beautiful green. I'm going to do the same process with this, just a messy coat, almost like a dry brush, but a little bit thicker. Not getting it perfect, not getting it neat, just kind of getting it on there, because when I'm done and when this paint dries, I'm going to heavily distress it, because like I said before, I want these breadboards to look old and vintage and used and old-timey. So I've got the English Ivy on this breadboard, and for the wood round, I'm going to put a messy coat of Dixie Belle color greens. And all of these are chalk paints, And all of these are super simple to use on surfaces like this. I'm just gonna do the one coat. I don't want full coverage. I just want it to look kind of vintage and old. So I'm going to take the collard greens here. This is one of my favorite darker greens from the Dixie Belle chalk line because it has kind of some black undertones to it. I was going to use black for this breadboard, but then I decided to go with the collard greens because I like kind of that shade of the dark green, almost black. So I'll continue to add my messy coat of the collard greens to the wood round breadboard, and then we'll let these completely dry and we'll move on to the next step. After the paint dried, I took these out in my garage and I used my orbital sander with 220 grit sandpaper, and I heavily distressed the boards. And now we're going to embellish the decorated side of the breadboard. And for this one, I am going to put a stamp on there, and this stamp is Kindest Regards by IOD. It's one of my favorite stamps, and I'm going to be using mixing white ink for this stamp. I want the words on this stamp to show up on the dark background. So I'm taking my IOD mixing white ink and I'm dabbing it all over the stamp, and then I'm going to place the stamp where I want it to go on my board. So that's super easy. You just take your stamp, turn it around, place it ink side down, and then use your hands. I like to put one hand where it stays, holds kind of the stamp in place, and then go over the rest with my other hand just to make sure that everything is inked up neat. And this is a permanent ink, but if you do happen to make a mistake like I did there, I had a little bit of smudging, I'm just taking a baby wipe, and if you wipe it up right away, it will come right off. Once the ink dries, it is permanent and it will not come off. And so then I just take my baby wipe and I wipe the excess ink off of my stamp, and it's ready to use for the next time. For these two breadboards, I'm going to put a stamp on there as well, and I'm going to be using the IOD Vintage Textures stamp. And for this one, I'm also going to use black ink. So I'm just going to take the Vintage Textures stamp. There's 4 patterns on it, and I'm using kind of this crackly looking pattern, and I'm applying my black ink to the stamp, and then I'm going to do the same thing. For these, I'm just going to kind of place the stamp in random places on the board and pressing it down with my hand. So I have the one board down. I'm going to re-ink the stamp again and do the same process on the other breadboard. Just kind of stamping in random places to kind of make these breadboards look like they're old and kind of cracked, and the paint is kind of chippy and cracked. And then I'm going to take my baby wipe again and clean off my stamp, and then it's ready for the next time. I let my ink completely dry, and I'm going to add a transfer to all of my breadboards. And this breadboard is going to get the Painterly Floral Lavender Sprigs. And I just took my breadboard and I laid it on the transfer and traced out the shape of my breadboard. And super simple. Transfers are really easy to use. You just peel off the backing, and then the back side of the transfer is tacky. So you want to place your transfer where you want it on your surface, and the tackiness of that is going to help it kind of stay in place. And then you just rub it down, and you take what's called the transfer tool and you rub it over the entire surface of the transfer. And then once you get your transfer completely rubbed down with your transfer tool, then you start at one side of the transfer and start peeling up on the other side. And you'll see that the transfer is adhered to your surface. You just peel that back until everything is adhered. And once it's on your surface, then you want to take your hand and the back of the transfer sheet and just kind of burnish the surface. And that's just ensuring that your transfer is wrinkle-free and bubble-free. So I'm going to keep applying my transfer, peeling it back, starting from one side, working to the other, going slowly to make sure everything sticks down, and then I will burnish my transfer. And once this is burnished, I'm going to take some 220 grit sandpaper. Like I said before, I want these breadboards to look old and I don't want the transfers to look brand new. So I'm just distressing them a little bit, and I'm going one side and then the other, and that's just going to kind of take the newness look off of the transfer. For this breadboard, I chose a transfer from the Rose Botanical transfer set from IOD, and I just cut out the piece of transfer that I wanted to use on here. And with all transfers, you just peel off the back of the transfer sheet, you lay your transfer down on the surface, and I'll do the same thing that I did before. I'll rub over it with my hand, and then I'll start applying it with the transfer tool, rubbing over the entire transfer to make sure that it's completely stuck to my breadboard. And then I will start from one side of the transfer and slowly work my way across to the other, peeling it up, making sure that my transfer is completely applied to the breadboard. And just to know that if you ever have a spot where your transfer doesn't stick, you just lay your transfer back down and rub over it again with your transfer tool until it sticks. Really easy, super simple. So I'll continue to apply my transfer, and like the other breadboard, when this one is done, I'm going to burnish it first with my hand, then with the transfer vellum, and then I'm going to take my 220 grit sandpaper and distress the transfer because I don't want it to look bright, new, and shiny. I want it to look old, vintage, and distressed. And I'm going to sand in one direction and then sand again in another direction. For the round breadboard, I chose a transfer from the IOD Rose Botanical transfer set, and I cut it out beforehand, and I'm just going to place it down on my board where I want it to go. And just like the other transfers, you peel off the back of the transfer, lay your transfer down, use your transfer tool to rub over the transfer until it's applied to the whole surface, and then start from one side of your transfer and start to slowly peel back until your transfer is applied. Just like the other breadboards, I'm going to burnish the transfer on with the transfer sheet, and then I'm going to take my 220 grit sandpaper and distress the transfer, first going in one direction and then turning the board and going in another direction until it's all distressed and vintage looking. The breadboards are ready to be sealed, and because I want to actually use these for foods, I need to use a product that is food safe, and so I'm going to be using Sweet Pickins tung oil, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tint it with some Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Suitcase. I want my sealant to be dark and to make these look kind of grungy, so I'm going to put some of the tung oil in a bowl, and then I'm going to add just a spoonful of the suitcase milk paint just to tint it to make it a darker sealant. And the Sweet Pickins milk paint and the Sweet Pickins tung oil are completely food safe. So you can use these breadboards for food. If you just wanted to use these as decor boards and you didn't want to use food, you could seal them with a top coat, you could seal them with a wax, you could seal them with anything like that, but just know those aren't food safe and they would just have to be decor boards then. But I wanted these to be food safe, which is why I'm using these products. And so I'm just taking my microfiber cloth, dipping it into my tung oil that's been tinted, and rubbing it over the entire breadboard and letting it dry when it's done. And it's just giving it a really nice vintage look to the boards. So I'm going to continue to seal all of the boards. And once your boards have cured, which takes about 2 weeks, like I said, then they are 100% food safe. Just to let you know though, you don't want to submerge these breadboards in water. You just want to use a damp cloth or a hot cloth and clean them off when you're done. You don't want to put them in a dishwasher or submerge them in water. What's nice about the Sweet Pickins tung oil for projects like this is it dries to a very hard protective surface, almost epoxy-like. And you can do more than one coat if you want more protection. You just let them dry and then add more coats. The 3 breadboards are all done and I think they turned out absolutely beautiful. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. And just so you know, all of the products that I used on these breadboards are available at my website, thevintagehenandchick.com, or if you're local, I do carry these products at my booth at Past and Present Home Gallery in Alexandria, Minnesota. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope I've inspired you to upcycle your thrifted, garage sale, and old home decor because it's so much fun to turn it into something more current or more your style. I'll be back next week with another video and I hope to see you then. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell, and that way you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you all so much for watching and have a wonderful day.